It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Let me teach you a truth the powerful have always known but rarely speak aloud. Emotion is a leash. The more you care, the tighter it pulls. The more you feel, the more control you give away. Most people believe that caring deeply makes them stronger, more human, more connected, but in the harsh reality of power, it makes you predictable. It makes you weak. The world does not belong to those who feel the most. It belongs to those who master how they feel. The quiet ones, the composed ones, the ones who could care but choose not to. You think love conquers all? Think again. Detachment commands more respect than any emotion ever could. You think people admire your vulnerability? No, they study it. They memorize your patterns. They look for ways to use your empathy, your need to be understood, against you. Caring is currency, and the one who spends less controls the market. While others give themselves away trying to be liked, the detached man becomes rare, mysterious, unreachable. And that mystery creates gravity. Power doesn't chase. Power doesn't justify itself. Power watches, calculates, and lets others collapse under the weight of their own emotional chaos. But here's what they won't tell you. Detachment doesn't mean coldness. It means strategy. It means strength. It means you no longer place your peace in the hands of others. It means you feel everything but reveal nothing. You lead through silence. You influence through distance. You protect yourself not by building walls, but by owning your emotional discipline like a weapon. In this video, we're going deep into 6 unbreakable laws drawn from the brutal insights of Machiavelli and the timeless calm of Stoic philosophy. These are the rules that separate the controlled from the controlling, the reactive from the untouchable, the forgotten from the feared. 1. Power starts with detachment. Power doesn't begin when you raise your voice. It doesn't begin when you dominate a room, win a debate, or earn someone's praise. It begins the moment you learn to detach, to pull your emotions out of the hands of others, to stop giving away your peace like it's cheap. The people you see as powerful aren't necessarily the loudest or the most aggressive. They're the ones who do not flinch no matter what chaos surrounds them. They remain centered, calculated, untouched by the noise. Why is detachment so essential? Because the world is full of people who want something from you. Your attention, your energy, your validation. If they can make you react, they own a part of you. Think about it. Every time you argue with someone who doesn't deserve your time, every time you over-explain yourself, chase closure, or seek approval, you're placing your power in their hands. But when you become emotionally self-sufficient, when you don't need their agreement, their praise, or their comfort, you become dangerous. You become independent in a world addicted to validation. People confuse detachment with coldness. But it's not about feeling nothing. It's about not letting your feelings control you. It's the art of feeling everything and revealing nothing. You observe without absorbing. You witness without reacting. You stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. That's what Machiavelli understood, and what every Stoic philosopher mastered. Because they knew the most powerful man in the room is not the one who shows the most passion. It's the one who controls himself when others can't. The Stoics taught that we must never allow external things, opinions, insults, praise, rejection, to disturb our inner peace. Why? Because those things are out of our control. Detachment, then, becomes a shield. Not to block out life, but to filter what enters and what doesn't. It's not avoidance, it's discipline. The discipline to say, I see what you're doing, I feel it, but you won't get a reaction from me. That level of composure is unsettling to people, and that's exactly why it's powerful. You become unpredictable, and when you're unpredictable, you're unbreakable. No one knows what bothers you, what motivates you, what shakes you. You move in silence. You lead without explaining. While others panic for attention, you remain still, and that stillness is unnerving. Because people can't control what they don't understand. They can't manipulate what they can't read. And they can't dominate someone who refuses to emotionally participate in their games. Imagine 2 people entering a negotiation. One is calm, measured, and emotionally distant. The other is anxious, eager, trying to win approval. Who has more leverage? Always the one who needs less. The detached man isn't cold, he's in control. He isn't careless, he's careful. His power doesn't come from aggression. It comes from the fact that he's not afraid to walk away. That single truth puts fear in everyone else. Because they know he holds no emotional debt, no leash, no need. And here's the truth that changes everything. The man who needs less controls more. He's not better because he's emotionless. He's better because he's emotionally sovereign. He doesn't hand over his reactions. He doesn't give away his energy. He doesn't base his identity on being liked or accepted. He builds himself from the inside, brick by brick, calmly, quietly. While others crumble at every rejection, he stands firm. That's what makes him untouchable. And that's where power begins. So let the world call you distant. Let them call you cold. They only say that because they can't move you. And when they can't move you, they can't control you. And when they can't control you, they fear you. That fear becomes respect. That respect becomes influence. And that influence is born not from force, not from charm, but from something far stronger: detachment. 2. Silence is magnetic. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control. They talk the most because they're trying to prove something. They overshare. They overreact. They beg to be seen. But power doesn't raise its voice. It lowers it. True power doesn't come from noise. It comes from presence. A calm, quiet presence that doesn't need to explain itself. It sits in the room like gravity, pulling attention without force. Silence in this world of oversharing and constant noise is rebellion. It is dominance. In every conversation, in every confrontation, silence is your secret weapon. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is pressure. Silence is power withheld. And that pressure forces others to lean in, to wonder, to imagine, and often to fear. When you speak less, others listen more. When you stop reacting, people lose their footing. They expect chaos. They expect anger. But when you give them stillness, they're left with their own emotions, and that's terrifying. This is why silence is magnetic. It creates a vacuum, a space they desperately want to fill. And in that space, they start projecting their insecurities, their assumptions, their guilt. You don't even have to say a word. They'll confess everything just to break the tension. The more they wonder what you're thinking, the more power you gain. That's the magic of mystery. It's not about hiding who you are. It's about not giving them the blueprint. Machiavelli knew this. He wrote, "The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar." And what creates a stronger appearance of strength than a man who doesn't need to speak to be heard? Emotional stillness is misunderstood by the average person, but it's revered by the strategic mind, because a man who speaks from desperation shows his hand. A man who waits, who observes, who speaks only when it serves his purpose, he's the one who controls the game. Think about the people you respect most. They aren't always the loudest. Often they're the ones who say less but mean more. One look, one sentence, one pause. It says everything. Their silence has weight. Why? Because they've mastered emotional control. They don't speak to be liked. They speak only when it matters. They let others unravel in the silence. In a world addicted to validation, silence is misunderstood. But that's exactly why it's powerful. When others are scrambling to explain themselves, to justify their worth, you remain still. That stillness breaks patterns. It disrupts expectations. It rewires the entire emotional dynamic. Because the truth is, stillness is unnerving. It shows that you're not emotionally involved in the chaos. And that scares people more than any argument ever could. There's a reason why Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius practice stillness, not just in body, but in mind. What they understood is that the calmer you are, the more clearly you see. Reactivity is blindness. Silence is clarity. In every heated moment, you have two choices: react from emotion or respond with discipline. And the more you choose silence over reaction, the more control you gain, not just over others, but over yourself. Think of it this way: the person who can stay calm when insulted, stay focused when provoked, and stay grounded when others are falling apart, that person becomes unshakable. They are no longer playing the same game as everyone else. They are playing a deeper game, a psychological one, where silence is strategy and presence is persuasion. And here's the paradox that confuses most people. When you say less, people remember more. Why? Because they fill in the blanks. They analyze your silence. They attach meaning to your stillness. Every moment you choose not to respond becomes a reflection point for someone else. Your silence becomes louder than their shouting. It speaks in a language they can't control, and that's what makes it powerful. Your silence also signals something deeper. You don't need them. You're not performing. You're not fighting for a place at the table. You've already built your own. And in a world where everyone is broadcasting their emotions just to be acknowledged, your refusal to participate sets you apart. It makes you memorable. It makes you dangerous. It makes you respected. That doesn't mean silence is about being passive. It's about being selective. Every word becomes intentional. Every pause becomes purposeful. Every decision to withhold becomes an act of power. And when you finally speak, people will lean in. Not because you're louder, but because you've trained them to know. When you speak, it matters. So let them spill their emotions. Let them scream for attention. Let them drown in their own noise. But you sit still. You measure your responses. You protect your energy like a king guards his crown. Your silence is not absence. It is presence in its purest form. And the more you master it, the more they will chase it, fear it, and respect it. Never forget, mystery is magnetic, stillness is strength, and silence is the echo of power too disciplined to be wasted. 3. Don't beg to be liked. If there's one weakness that ruins more men than anything else, it's this: the need to be liked. That quiet desperation for approval. That subtle hunger to be accepted. It looks harmless, it sounds virtuous, but it's the very crack through which your strength starts to leak. Because once you bend your character for the sake of someone else's validation, you've already given them power over you, and they will use it, consciously or not. The harsh truth? People can smell need, and when they do, respect vanishes. No one admires someone who constantly seeks permission to exist. When you rely on others to confirm your value, you become a puppet, tied to their reactions, dancing for their approval, shrinking for their comfort. And the more you chase that validation, the more they withhold it. Not because they're cruel, but because we're wired to chase what feels rare and disregard what feels desperate. Machiavelli warned against this centuries ago. It is much safer to be feared than loved when both cannot be had. That isn't a call to be heartless. It's a reminder that those who command respect don't beg for love. They don't water themselves down to fit in. They stand tall, even if they stand alone. Because a man who values his own opinion above anyone else's cannot be manipulated by praise, or destroyed by rejection. This need to be liked shows up in small ways. Over-explaining your decisions, apologizing for your silence, laughing at jokes you don't find funny, agreeing just to avoid tension. You lose tiny pieces of yourself with every compromise, and those pieces add up. Over time, you become a shell, liked by many, respected by none. But you weren't born to fit into their comfort zone. You weren't built to be agreeable, likable, soft around the edges just to survive socially. You were built for clarity, for strength, for purpose without apology. That means being okay with disappointing people who never truly understood you. It means being disliked for the right reasons, your boundaries, your standards, your refusal to bend. And let's be real. If you have to perform to be accepted, you were never truly accepted in the first place. That version of you they liked wasn't even real. And the longer you stay in that mask, the more exhausted you become. Because pretending to be someone you're not is the most draining form of slavery there is. The man who seeks to be liked by everyone is never fully himself. And a man who isn't himself can never be powerful. People beg to be liked because they fear rejection. But rejection isn't death. It's a mirror. It shows you who belongs and who doesn't. It cleanses. It clarifies. When you stop fearing rejection, you become bold in your authenticity. You start saying what you mean. You start walking your path without waiting for applause. You stop negotiating your identity for temporary approval. And yes, you may lose people, friends, lovers, business connections. But if they leave because you set a boundary, because you stood your ground, because you refuse to shrink, then let them go. Their departure is not your failure. It's their filter. The right ones won't need you to dull your fire. They'll be warmed by it, not threatened. And the wrong ones? They were only standing in the way of your strength. This is why the powerful rarely explain themselves. Not because they're arrogant, but because they're unshakable in their values. They don't need the room to clap. They don't care if they're misunderstood. Every great man from history, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Machiavelli, knew that emotional independence was the foundation of power. The moment you stop needing to be understood is the moment you start becoming feared and respected. So let them call you cold. Let them accuse you of being distant, selfish, too serious. They'll try to shame you into softening. Don't. Stay solid. The criticism will pass. The silence will pass. But the respect you earn by staying grounded, that lasts. That shapes how the world treats you. That becomes your gravity. Because here's what happens when you stop begging to be liked. The roles reverse. The people who once dismissed you will watch you. The ones who once manipulated you will second-guess themselves. The ones who ignored you will start chasing, not because you changed, but because you finally stopped chasing them. This is the law of emotional detachment. The moment you need less, you attract more. And when you no longer care who likes you, people start working for your attention. Not out of love, not out of loyalty, but out of respect for your indifference. And in that space where you're no longer emotionally dependent, you become the one who sets the pace. You become the one who's remembered. 4. Respond. Don't react. There's a difference between power and chaos, between discipline and emotion, between the man who rules himself and the one ruled by impulse. And that difference is this: the powerful respond, the weak react. It sounds simple, but it's the dividing line between leaders and pawns, between masters and victims, between those who move the world and those who are constantly moved by it. Reactions are emotional, immediate, unfiltered. They're driven by insecurity, by ego, by fear. When someone insults you and you lash out, that's not strength, that's submission. You've been provoked, and you've surrendered control. You've allowed someone else's words to dictate your state of mind. And every time you do that, you reinforce a habit, the habit of being controlled. But when you respond instead, when you pause, observe, assess, you reclaim your power. You send a message. I am not here to play your game. I'm here to play mine. And nothing is more unsettling to someone who seeks to provoke you than a calm face, an unreadable mind, and a perfectly measured reply. Or worse, no reply at all. Because when you stop reacting, you start dominating. Not emotionally, strategically. This is what the Stoics practiced: a stillness under fire, a composure that couldn't be broken by insults, praise, threats, or panic. They understood that emotional outbursts don't win battles, discipline does. That the man who can keep his heart still in the storm is the one who becomes the storm, because no one can predict his next move. And that unpredictability, it's psychological warfare. Look around. The average person is addicted to reacting. One wrong comment and they explode. One moment of silence and they spiral. They give away their emotional stability like it means nothing, and they call that being real. But it's not real, it's reckless, it's untrained, it's weak. Because true strength is the ability to choose your response, not just feel your feelings. The truth is, most people aren't reacting to you. They're reacting to their past, their pain, their insecurity, their fear of being seen or not being seen. And when you react back, you fall into their chaos. You start fighting a war that was never about you to begin with. But when you stay calm, when you stay grounded, you expose their weakness without saying a word. And that's when the dynamic shifts. That's when they start questioning themselves instead of attacking you. Machiavelli understood this well. He wrote, "A wise man does at once what a fool does at last." And what does the wise man do? He calculates. He waits. He watches. He doesn't take the bait. Because he knows that every reaction is a transaction, it costs you something: time, energy, focus, reputation. And the man who's careless with those things is easy to manipulate. Now that doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. You're human. You will feel anger, frustration, disappointment, but you are not a slave to those feelings. You are their master. And mastering your emotions doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you control how and when you express them. You make a conscious decision. Does this deserve my energy? Will this reaction move me forward or backwards? That pause alone, that moment of stillness, creates space, and in that space you become powerful. Here's something most people never consider. Every reaction reveals something about you, your insecurities, your priorities, your emotional soft spots. And once that information is out, it can be used against you. It becomes a map to your weaknesses, so the more you react, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier you are to control. But the man who responds, who waits, who doesn't show his hand, He is the one who stays in control. He doesn't flinch when provoked. He doesn't chase after insults to correct the record. He doesn't jump to defend his honor at every challenge, because his self-respect doesn't come from noise. It comes from inner certainty, and that certainty is terrifying to people who can't regulate their own minds. You want to win in life? Learn this. Not every battle deserves your sword. Most people are throwing emotional bait, hoping you'll bite. Don't. Let them flail. Let them scream. Let them argue with the silence. Your silence is not passivity. It's power under restraint. And the one who can remain still while others lose their composure, that man doesn't just survive. He leads. He sets the tempo. He walks through chaos untouched. And here's the part no one wants to hear. Sometimes your reaction is exactly what they want. Sometimes they don't want truth or clarity. They want your energy. They want your focus, your peace. And the moment you react, you've given it to them. You've fed their ego. You've affirmed their power over you. But when you withhold that reaction, when you respond instead of explode, you leave them empty. And in that emptiness, they feel their own weakness. So train yourself. Train yourself to breathe before responding, to pause before speaking, to watch before acting. And understand this. The man who controls his reactions controls his world. He sees the insult and lets it pass. He hears the lie and doesn't flinch. He senses the chaos but remains still. And that stillness, that's what makes people respect you. That's what gives your presence weight. Because when you no longer react to everything, people realize they can't play with your emotions. They can't control you. And in a world full of emotionally impulsive people, that calm, grounded energy becomes magnetic. So stop reacting, start responding. Not out of emotion, but out of intention. Not out of weakness, but out of principle. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them get uncomfortable in the silence. And you remain focused, calm, unreadable, because that's how power speaks. 5. Win without needing. Need is the enemy of power. The more you need, the weaker you become. Not because needing something makes you less human, but because need makes you vulnerable. And in the game of power, vulnerability is not romantic, it's a target. Think about the people who get manipulated the easiest. They're not the careless ones. They're the ones who care too much. The ones who are emotionally invested. The ones who desperately need to be understood, to be wanted, to be chosen. But here's the harsh truth. When you need someone to choose you, you've already lost the ability to walk away. And the one who cannot walk away has no leverage. None. You don't win by proving your worth. You win by knowing it. Quietly. Calmly. Without begging for confirmation. When you operate from need, you start compromising. You lower your standards. You overlook red flags. You overgive, overthink, overextend. You trade your self-respect for the illusion of connection. But when you remove need, when you detach from the outcome, something incredible happens. You gain control. Need turns kings into servants. It blinds judgment, weakens boundaries, and hands your power over to people who haven't earned it. Look closely. This shows up everywhere, in business, in friendships, in relationships. The man who needs the deal signs too quickly. The man who needs the partner forgives too easily. The man who needs approval changes too often. But the man who doesn't need, he negotiates from a place of strength. He chooses, not pleads. He walks away, not breaks down. And because of that, he gets what others chase. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to act and repent than not to act and regret." But he also believed that the one who holds power does not rely on the whims of others. He builds a position that stands on its own, so that if alliances shift or people fall away, his core remains. And that's exactly what need threatens. It puts your stability in someone else's hands. Let's bring this down to the most personal level. Relationships. Romantic, social, even familial. When you love from need, you love like a slave. You attach your worth to their presence. You hand over your emotional state like a weapon and hope they won't use it. And when they do, you collapse. You negotiate your value to maintain peace. But when you love without needing, you become free. You can give without losing. You can care without chasing. You can walk away with your dignity intact. That is the love of a powerful man. One who chooses, not one who clings. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb. That's not strength. That's avoidance. No, this is about becoming emotionally sovereign. owning your internal world so deeply that no one can shake it. You may want someone in your life. You may value the connection, but you are not dependent on it, and that distinction is everything. Because the man who needs nothing cannot be manipulated. He cannot be baited. He cannot be broken. He is free in the truest sense. You've probably seen this in your own life. The moment you stop needing the job, you interview better. The moment you stop needing their love, you become more attractive. The moment you stop needing the outcome, you perform with more confidence. Why? Because energy doesn't lie. People sense desperation, they also sense power, and they always respond to whichever one you project. This is why detachment is the hidden foundation of every dominant presence. The generals who win wars aren't emotionally attached to every tactic. They adapt, pivot, remain fluid. The businessmen who close deals don't walk in desperate to be accepted. They negotiate from a position of, I'm good with or without this. And the man who commands attention in any room isn't desperate for applause. He's grounded in silence. Need is a prison built out of fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. But what happens when you no longer fear those things? What happens when your self-worth becomes untouchable? Not because you're better than anyone else, but because you've decided you're no longer for sale. That's when you become magnetic. That's when people begin to chase you, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Because you are the one thing they cannot control. This mindset is especially critical in today's world. With social media, validation is everywhere, and so is the illusion of need. People are constantly performing, comparing, chasing a feeling of being seen. But that chase leads nowhere. It's a loop, a trap. And the only way to escape it is to stop needing, to step back, reclaim your power, and operate from inner abundance. When you no longer need anything external to validate you, you stop tolerating nonsense. You stop chasing empty rewards. You stop selling your soul for shallow connection. And in that void, left by all the things you've refused, you find something rare, freedom. You stop making choices out of fear and start making them out of vision. You stop tolerating disrespect and start commanding respect without ever asking for it. You stop waiting to be chosen and realize you were the one holding the pen the entire time. So understand this. You win not by having the most, but by needing the least. You win by staying rooted when others are reaching. You win by becoming the one who could walk away and still be whole. You don't beg, you don't chase, you don't break, you choose. You stand, you lead. 6. Detach. Dominate. There's a reason detachment is feared, misunderstood, and often criticized. It's the most misunderstood form of strength. People call it cold. They call it heartless. But what they don't understand is this. Detachment isn't emotional death. It's emotional mastery. And in a world where everyone is ruled by their feelings, the one who detaches strategically is the one who dominates. You dominate not by overpowering others, but by refusing to be owned by them. That's what detachment gives you. Freedom. Freedom from their opinions. Freedom from their praise. Freedom from their betrayal. When they try to guilt you, shame you, or bait you into a reaction, your detachment is what keeps you anchored. It's what keeps you untouchable. Detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you've chosen not to be led by feelings. It means you understand that emotions are useful but unreliable, real but not always right. The man who can observe his emotions without becoming enslaved by them. That man is rare. That man is dangerous. That man is free. And freedom is what makes you powerful. Because the man who's attached to outcomes, people, or praise is always negotiating with himself. He's second-guessing. He's adjusting his path just to avoid discomfort. He hesitates. He compromises. But the detached man, he walks forward with clarity. He doesn't cling to how things should be. He adapts. He cuts ties when necessary. He walks away when disrespected. And because he doesn't cling, he can't be cornered. Think of every great strategist, Machiavelli, Aurelius, Sun Tzu. None of them taught domination through emotion. They taught domination through detachment, through the ability to wait, to listen, to anticipate, to strike only when the moment was right. That's what makes detachment dangerous. You don't telegraph your emotions. You don't leak your strategy. You watch the room while everyone else tries to read your silence. Detachment is your invisibility cloak. And in that invisibility, you become unpredictable. No one knows what matters to you. No one knows what rattles you. No one knows how to break you because you don't give them anything to work with. You don't flinch. You don't explain. You don't apologize for having boundaries. When someone betrays you, you don't spiral. You watch. You note. You make decisions based on logic, not vengeance. Because vengeance is emotional. Revenge is predictable. But indifference? Indifference is terrifying. Because it shows you were never relying on them to begin with. Imagine what that kind of presence does in a room. While others compete, you observe. While others argue, you assess. While others fight to be seen, you become the one they can't ignore. Why? Because you don't care who sees you. You care who respects you. And respect isn't earned through emotion. It's earned through control. Detachment also protects your mission. In a world constantly demanding your attention, your opinion, your outrage, detachment keeps you focused. It shields your time. It shields your energy. It forces you to ask, does this deserve a response? Does this serve my path? Most distractions die in the face of that question. You stop participating in every emotional conflict. You stop chasing closure. You stop begging people to understand you. Because when you're detached, you realize you don't need to be understood to be effective. You don't need to be liked to lead. You don't need applause to execute. You move on principle, not permission. People will criticize this mindset. They'll say you're too distant, that you're cold, that you're disconnected. But don't be fooled. Their discomfort is proof you're rising. The weak hate what they can't influence. When they can't provoke you, they'll try to shame you. Let them. Their opinion was never your compass. You must become a fortress, calm on the outside, disciplined on the inside. You don't crumble under pressure. You don't get pulled into meaningless wars. You don't hand over your emotional triggers for others to exploit. Your presence is calm. Your energy is grounded. Your silence is loud. That is domination. And it's not about being alone. It's about being whole before anyone enters your space. Detachment teaches you to stop looking for someone else to complete you. It teaches you that the highest form of power is self-possession, not arrogance, not emotional isolation, just an unshakable core that doesn't panic, doesn't beg, and doesn't fold when the world tries to press in. You don't dominate through volume. You dominate through presence, through mystery, through your ability to walk away from anything that disrespects your peace. Whether it's a toxic relationship, a one-sided deal, or a pointless argument, you detach and move on, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. That's what they don't teach you. That detachment is not about abandoning people. It's about protecting yourself. It's about not bleeding for people who wouldn't offer you a drop. It's about not fighting battles you've already outgrown. It's about knowing that peace is not something the world hands you. It's something you guard with your life. So, detachment. Dominate. Be the one who doesn't react, the one who doesn't chase, the one who doesn't explain, and in doing so become the one they all pay attention to. Because once you stop needing their validation, their loyalty, their understanding, you become the one thing they can't live without. Unreachable, unreadable, unstoppable. Now you see the truth caring less doesn't make you weak. It makes you untouchable. It's not about apathy. It's about strategy. It's not about withdrawing from the world. It's about mastering how you move through it. You've heard 6 powerful laws, rules rooted in centuries of wisdom from the cold realism of Machiavelli to the inner calm of Stoicism, and they all point to one timeless fact. The less you need, the more you control. When you detach, you see clearly. You hear what others miss. You feel without being led by emotion. That's what separates the slave from the strategist, the reactor from the ruler, and Machiavelli knew it. The one who builds his strength on the opinions of others builds on sand. The Stoics knew it too. Freedom is the power to live as one wills. And you? Now you know it. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to beg to be seen. You don't need to react to be in control. Because control is not about dominating others. It's about refusing to be dominated by your own emotional chaos. So what does it mean to care less? It means you stop trading your peace for approval. You stop placing your self-worth in the hands of people who wouldn't bleed for you. You let go of the need to be liked and start commanding the space with silence, certainty, and presence. That's when you shift. That's when they start panicking. When you stop reacting. When you stop chasing. When you stop giving them access to your emotions like it's free, you become a storm they can't predict, a mirror they can't read, a mystery they can't solve. And when that happens, you win. Because the man who doesn't care what they think, doesn't panic when they leave, and doesn't flinch when he's tested, he becomes the one they all revolve around. That is the Stoic way. That is the Machiavellian truth. That is your path. Now walk it with power, with clarity, and above all, with detachment. If this message struck a nerve, if it awakened something calm, focused, and unstoppable inside you, then this channel is for you. Subscribe now, like the video, and share it with someone who still believes caring too much is a strength, because in this world power doesn't chase, power chooses, and power always, always cares less.